The snow was coming down in thick, blinding sheets when I saw her, my daughter alone, shivering on the icy walkway outside the Whitmore mansion, while laughter and firelight glowed through its grand windows. For a second, I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Claire, my fiercely independent journalist daughter, the woman who once exposed corruption in City Hall, was sitting on the ground like an outcast, her arms wrapped around herself, wearing nothing but a cocktail dress. Inside, her husband's family toasted Christmas around a roaring fireplace. It was a picture of wealth and cruelty painted in one brutal contrast. By the time I reached her, my voice barely carried over the wind. She looked up, dazed, her lips blue, her eyes unfocused, until recognition broke through the frost. "Mom," she whispered, "what are you doing here?" I wrapped my coat around her trembling shoulders and pulled her to her feet, fury rising like fire against the freezing air. 5 years earlier, I had smiled through her wedding to Stephen Whitmore, heir to one of Boston's most powerful families, even though my instincts told me something was wrong. I'd stayed silent as Claire gave up her promising career, her independence, her friends, each step a small surrender wrapped in luxury. The Whitmores were respected, influential old money. To outsiders, they looked perfect. But from the moment Claire moved into their estate, she began fading, shrinking into herself. The woman who once called me every morning now texted only on holidays, her words cautious, filtered. The final insult came 3 days before Christmas, a text from Stephen's phone, not hers. Claire is fully committed to Whitmore family traditions this year. Perhaps you can visit after the holidays if our schedule permits. Our schedule permits. My blood boiled just remembering it. So I drove through a blizzard on Christmas Eve to that mansion of marble and deceit. And now, as I looked through their glittering bay windows, I saw what they had done to my daughter. "Why are you out here?" I demanded as I steadied her. Claire's eyes darted toward the house, fear flickering across her pale face. I spoke out of turn. "At dinner," she murmured. I questioned Douglas's business project. Stephen said I needed to reflect on my place in the family. The words hit me harder than the cold. Reflect on her place. They'd left her outside like a misbehaving pet. Through the glass, I could see Douglas Whitmore's silver hair, perfect posture, the patriarch holding court, while his sons laughed beside him. The women sat silent, arranged like ornaments. My daughter was freezing to death, 20 feet away, and not one of them had bothered to look outside. I half dragged, half carried her to the door. When I opened it, the room fell silent. The music, the laughter, the pretense, it all died in a heartbeat. Stephen stood by the fire, his expression sliding from shock to feigned concern. "Claire." "Darling, I was just about to check on you," he lied smoothly. "Have you had time to reconsider your behavior?" I glared at him. "She's suffering from hypothermia. She needs warmth and medical care, not punishment." Douglas rose slowly, his voice cold and measured. "This is an intrusion, Pauline. Our family has rules. Claire understands there are consequences for disrespect." "Consequences," I spat. "You call this discipline, leaving her in the snow like that?" Stephen stepped forward, hand possessive on Claire's shoulder. "Mom, please. You don't understand our family dynamics." But I did. I understood perfectly. I saw the pattern now, the isolation, the control, the way they had chipped away at her until she no longer trusted her own voice. Something inside me snapped. I looked Douglas Whitmore straight in the eye. Decades of business negotiations giving my voice the steel it needed. I know about Project Prometheus, I said evenly. The effect was instant. His color drained. Stephen froze. The brothers exchanged panicked glances. Project Prometheus, their secret network of offshore accounts and fraudulent deals I'd discovered years ago when investigating my future in-laws for Claire's sake. I'd buried that knowledge, hoping never to use it. Until now. "We're leaving," I said, wrapping an arm around my daughter. "You will not come after us. If you do, the world will hear every detail of your project." No one moved as I led Claire out. Snow swallowed the sound of the mansion behind us. In the car, she sat silently wrapped in my coat, her body trembling less from cold now than from shock. "We'll go to a hotel," I told her, keeping my eyes on the barely visible road. "You need to rest." "No hospitals," she whispered. "Please, Mom." "I just need to warm up. I can't answer questions yet." I didn't argue. I knew that tone, the voice of a survivor clinging to control. At the Rosewood Inn, I got her into a suite, ran the shower, ordered hot soup and tea. When she emerged, 20 minutes later, wrapped in a robe, color slowly returning to her cheeks, she looked like a fragile echo of the woman she once was. She sat across from me by the fire, clutching her mug. "Thank you for coming," she said quietly. "How did you know?" "A mother knows," I replied. The truth was simpler. I had been afraid for years, but fear had finally given way to certainty. Something in her marriage had been deeply wrong. She stared into the flames. "It started so slowly," she said. "Stephen wasn't like this before. He was kind, supportive. Then it became little things. Comments about my friend's suggestions to take fewer assignments, that maybe journalism was too stressful. Douglas praised me when I stayed home, criticized me when I spoke up. By our 3rd anniversary, I'd quit my job. By our 4th, I barely saw anyone outside the family." Her voice cracked. "They made me believe that independence was arrogance." I listened each word, sharpening my fury. "And tonight?" I asked. She swallowed hard. Douglas was boasting about a new development, luxury condos, replacing a low-income neighborhood. I said it was unethical. He told me women shouldn't comment on business they don't understand. Stephen said I needed to reflect on my place. She looked down. "That's what reflecting looks like." The knock on the door made her flinch. "Just room service." As I set the tray down, she checked her phone. Dozens of messages from Stephen and Douglas. "They're furious," she whispered. "What if they come here?" I took her phone and turned it off. "Let them try. They have no idea who they're dealing with." She gave a weak, uncertain smile. "You always say that, because it's always true." That night, while she slept in the adjoining room, I sat by the fire with my laptop open, scrolling through encrypted files I hadn't touched in years, proof of the Whitmore Empire's corruption. If they thought they could destroy my daughter, they were about to learn what it meant to cross a woman who had spent her life dismantling men like them. By morning, the blizzard had passed, leaving behind a city glazed in silver. Claire was still asleep in the next room, her breathing steady for the first time in years. I ordered breakfast and opened my laptop again, scanning through the files I'd saved years ago, shell companies, offshore transfers, falsified environmental reports. Project Prometheus wasn't just a business operation. It was a machine built on exploitation. And it was my leverage. When Claire emerged wrapped in a sweater and her hair loose around her shoulders, she looked exhausted, but steadier. "You really do have it all, don't you?" she said softly, seeing the files open on my screen. Evidence that could ruin them. I compiled it before your wedding, I admitted. Stephen's family never passed a background check. I couldn't break. I hoped I'd never need to use it. She sat down across from me, stirring her coffee. Why didn't you warn me? I met her eyes. Would you have believed me then? She hesitated, then nodded faintly. Probably not. I thought I was in love. She looked out the window, her voice quieter. They made sure I saw you as the problem. Too independent, too outspoken. Stephen said your influence made it harder for me to be a good wife. My chest tightened, but I stayed silent. Claire didn't need guilt from me. She needed clarity. They've done it to all the women she went on. Douglas's wife, his son's wives. We were all molded to be quiet, agreeable. There was one woman who tried to leave Richard's first wife, Meredith. They destroyed her reputation, took her son. She vanished. Her hands trembled slightly as she took another sip of coffee. They said she was unstable, ungrateful. I believed them. Until I became her. She looked up at me, then eyes sharp again. I don't want to live like that anymore. Before I could respond, a hard knock rattled the door. My instincts screamed caution. Claire went pale. It's them, she whispered. I opened the peephole, and there they were. Stephen, Douglas, and a man in a tailored coat holding a leather briefcase, likely a lawyer. I stepped into the doorway, blocking their view. Pauline Douglas said smoothly, "We've come for Claire. This misunderstanding has gone on long enough." His tone was the kind of controlled authority that expected obedience. I smiled thinly. Claire isn't receiving visitors. Stephen took a step forward. Mom, please. She belongs at home. It's Christmas morning. His voice carried a practiced sympathy that made my skin crawl. From behind me, Claire's voice broke the silence. I'm not coming home, Stephen. She stood in the doorway, pale but resolute. Not now. Not ever. The mask slipped from his face. Don't be ridiculous, he snapped. You're confused. Whatever this is, we can fix it. Fix it, I cut in, like you fixed it last night. Leaving her in the snow. Douglas's eyes hardened. This is a family matter, Pauline. You're overstepping. My daughter's safety is my only matter, I said evenly. And Claire has made her choice. The lawyer stepped forward. Mrs. Whitmore, leaving your marital home without cause could be viewed as abandonment. I held up a hand. Save the threats. I have evidence of your client's other business interests. Would you like me to call the press now or later? That shut him up. Claire's voice was steady. I'm not going back. Stephen's jaw tightened, his eyes darkening. You're making a mistake, he hissed. Think about the consequences. I met his glare. Is that a threat? Douglas placed a restraining hand on his son's arm, forcing composure. A reminder, he said coldly. Actions have consequences. So does cruelty, I replied, and closed the door in their faces. Claire slumped against the wall, shaking with adrenaline. They'll try something else, she whispered. They always do. Then we'll be ready, I said. You're not alone anymore. Within an hour, I called in every favor I'd built over my 30-year consulting career. A digital security specialist named Marcus, a ruthless divorce attorney, Diane Abernathy, and an old friend at the Boston Globe, Jonathan Pierce, a journalist who once mentored Claire. They all agreed to meet within the day. By the time Marcus arrived with his laptop and a determined expression, Claire's phone had already started buzzing with strange alerts. They're tracking you, he said, after a quick scan. 2 spyware programs plus remote access to your camera and mic. They've been monitoring everything you do, Claire's face drained of color. They've been watching me. Probably for years, Marcus said, fingers flying across the keyboard. But they won't anymore. When Diane showed up, all sharp lines and sharper intellect, She didn't waste time on sympathy. "You want out?" she asked. "Completely. No reconciliation?" "No," Claire said firmly. "I want my life back." Diane nodded once. "Then we hit them legally and strategically. But we'll need proof." I opened my laptop, turning the screen toward her. "We have that." She scrolled through the Project Prometheus files, her eyes narrowing with interest. "Corruption, tax fraud, environmental violations. And these are tied directly to the Whitmore Family Trust. All of it, I confirmed." "And there's more," Claire can confirm. "A secure database exists at Douglas's office. If we can access it, it could expose everything." Diane leaned back, her expression calculating. "Good. Then we'll use this as leverage. But first things first, we protect Claire." She began drafting paperwork for an emergency restraining order, citing the incident of exposure as evidence of endangerment. Meanwhile, Marcus rebuilt Claire's digital footprint from scratch: new phone, new accounts, encrypted communications. By afternoon, the suite had transformed into a war room. Jonathan arrived last, looking like he hadn't slept in days. He hugged Claire tightly. "When you disappeared, I knew something was wrong," he said. "They told everyone you wanted a quiet life. They lied," Claire said simply. As we strategized, the room hummed with a mix of fear and resolve. We were taking on one of the most powerful families in Boston, and every one of us knew what that meant. But as Claire sat beside me, shoulders squared, eyes bright with the fire I'd thought long extinguished, I realized something else. The Whitmores hadn't destroyed her completely. They had underestimated her, and that mistake was about to cost them everything. The next morning dawned sharp and clear, a deceptive calm before what I knew would be the storm. Diane had filed the emergency restraining order overnight, and by 7:40 p.m., Judge Alexandra Winters had approved it. 10 days of protection, preventing any Whitmore from coming within 500 feet of Claire. A small, temporary victory, but enough to buy us time. "They'll challenge it," Diane warned, as we sat over breakfast in the apartment's quiet kitchen. "But that means they'll have to go on record. Let them explain to a judge why they thought locking a woman outside in a snowstorm was discipline." Claire nodded, but her expression was anxious. "They'll try something else. Douglas never loses control for long." Right on cue, Marcus's laptop chimed. "Incoming," he muttered. "Stevens filed a police report claiming you're mentally unstable, Claire. Says your mother's manipulating you." He looked up grimly. "They've requested a welfare check." "Of course they have," I said. "It's the oldest play in the book." The phone rang moments later. "Ms. Bennett, Detective, Morales, Boston PD. We've received a welfare call from your son-in-law." His tone was neutral, but professional. I handed the phone to Claire, who took a deep breath before speaking. "Detective, this is Claire Whitmore. I'm safe and here by choice. I've filed a restraining order due to domestic abuse and can provide the court documents." She paused, listening. "Yes, you may confirm with Judge Winters's office. I'm in no danger except from the Whitmore family." Her voice didn't waver once. When she hung up, she exhaled shakily. "He's sending a patrol to confirm." "Good," Diane said. "Let them see you stable and clear-headed. Every record strengthens our case." When the two officers arrived, one veteran, one young rookie. They spoke privately with Claire, then, briefly, with me. They left, satisfied, promising to file their report, confirming her safety. As the door closed, I turned to Diane. "That's one attempt, neutralized," she nodded. "They'll escalate." Marcus was already scanning his screen. They just filed an emergency petition in family court, claiming temporary insanity and undue influence. They want Stephen named as Claire's guardian. Claire's face went white. They're trying to take control of my life legally. Diane snorted. Predictable and futile. We'll have you evaluated by an independent psychiatrist today. The court will toss their petition before sunset. Dr. Elenara Kapoor was efficient, compassionate, and utterly impartial. Claire spent 3 hours in her office answering questions with a calm honesty that even the most skeptical evaluator couldn't refute. When she emerged, Dr. Kapoor followed her tone, measured but warm. There is no sign of instability, she said. Only evidence of prolonged emotional control and psychological abuse. I'll send my report to Judge Winters this afternoon. Claire's shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. You're very strong, Dr. Kapoor said gently. But recovery from coercive control is a process. Let yourself heal. Our next stop was the Boston Police Department's Special Victims Unit. Jonathan had arranged a meeting with Lieutenant Sandra Rivera, a woman who radiated quiet authority. Her walls were covered not with awards, but with photos of survivors she'd helped. After hearing our story, she nodded once. I'll handle the escort myself. Families like the Whitmores thrive on intimidation. We'll make sure they don't get the chance. By early afternoon, our small convoy turned into the Whitmore estate. The gates stood open again, snow shoveled into perfect symmetry. Douglas was waiting, silver hair gleaming, flanked by his lawyer, Edward Harrington. His face remained calm, but his eyes were cold enough to freeze steel. This is unnecessary, he said smoothly as we stepped out. If Claire needed anything, she could have requested it through proper channels. Lieutenant Rivera's tone was polite but firm. We're executing a lawful court order. Miss Bennett will retrieve her belongings without interference. She deliberately used Claire's maiden name, and I saw Douglas's jaw tighten. Inside the mansion's perfection now looked sterile, suffocating. Every surface gleamed, every flower arrangement identical. Claire led us upstairs, her posture stiff with old memories. They've searched my things, she murmured, opening a drawer half filled with disturbed clothing. They were looking for my journal. She checked her usual hiding place, a compartment beneath the window seat, then froze. Empty. A flicker of panic crossed her face, then calculation. She crossed to a bookcase, running her fingers along the spines until she found an old copy of Pride and Prejudice. Hollowed pages concealed a small leather notebook. Got it, she breathed. As she packed her clothes, laptop, and heirloom jewelry, Douglas hovered at the doorway, his expression souring by the minute. When Claire requested access to the family safe, he finally snapped. Absolutely not. Those items are insured under the Whitmore Trust. Diane stepped in smoothly. Inheritance law disagrees, Mr. Whitmore. The jewelry remains her personal property unless a signed transfer exists. Do you have one? His silence was answer enough. Under the lieutenant's supervision, he opened the safe. Claire retrieved 3 velvet boxes, her grandmother's pearls, emerald earrings, and gold wedding band. Then her gaze caught a metal case on his desk. For a split second, her expression changed, recognition alarm, and resolve all at once. What is it? I whispered. The external hard drive, she murmured. A backup of Project Prometheus. Douglas moved protectively in front of it. We're done here, he said. Take your trinkets and leave. Claire said nothing, but as we walked out, she met my eyes. I understood she'd seen what we needed. Outside, as we loaded the car, Douglas made one last attempt to assert dominance. You're making a grave mistake, Claire, he said quietly. The Whitmores protect their own. Claire met his gaze with new steadiness. I'm no longer one of yours. Back in the car, she exhaled deeply, her hands trembling. I wasn't sure I could face him. You did, I said proudly. And you won. She gave a faint smile. Not yet, but soon. When we returned to the apartment, Marcus was waiting, eyes alight. I think I'm in, he said, fingers flying across his keyboard. Using Stephen's cached credentials from Claire's laptop and Douglas's unlock pattern, she'd memorized. Marcus had breached the Whitmore server. Lines of encrypted text flooded the screen. Welcome to Project Prometheus, he said. The files were meticulous. Folders of offshore accounts, bribery payments disguised as consulting fees, environmental violations buried under settlement NDAs. They've been laundering money for decades, Jonathan muttered, taking notes. But one folder made my stomach turn. Wife management. Inside were detailed psychological programs, methods for isolating and controlling the women who married into the family. Claire stared at her own file. Year 1, establish dependence. Year 2, restrict employment. Year 3, reduce social ties. Year 4, full financial control. Her voice broke. They planned my entire life like a business model. Diane leaned over her shoulder. This is evidence of coercive control, legally recognized abuse. Combined with their financial crimes, it's enough to bring them down. Claire wiped her eyes, but there was no weakness in her expression now. Then, let's end it. The files we uncovered that night would change everything. Claire sat beside me, eyes locked on the screen, as lines of corruption scrolled faster than either of us could process. Bribes to senators, secret land grabs, shell companies routing millions through nonprofits. And beneath it all, the one thing that tied everything together, the Whitmore Foundation, a philanthropic facade masking decades of exploitation. Jonathan's voice trembled with a mix of outrage and awe. This isn't just fraud, he said. It's generational crime. If we publish this, it'll take down half of Boston's elite. Diane's expression was pure steel, which is why we'll do it carefully. The moment we move, they'll retaliate. We need airtight evidence, digital signatures corroboration, no loopholes they can wriggle through. Marcus leaned back, cracking his knuckles. Already handled. I've mirrored their servers and backed everything to encrypted drives. Even if they wipe the originals, we've got them. Claire stared at the screen. All these years, they used me as their cover. Every charity gala, every photo op. It was all theater. I thought I was helping people. You were, I said gently. You just didn't know who you were helping them to be. The plan formed quickly. Jonathan would break the story once Diane cleared the legal angles. Marcus would secure the data trail and timestamp the files to prevent manipulation. Claire and I would provide the human testimony, the face of their victims. It was dangerous, but truth often is. Still, I couldn't ignore the flicker of fear in Claire's eyes as she whispered, "They won't let this go. Douglas controls everything, police courts, even the press." I squeezed her hand. Then we go somewhere they can't reach us. We didn't make it 24 hours. At 6:17 the next morning, a black SUV pulled up outside the hotel. 2 men in suits stepped out, scanning the building. Marcus caught it first on the security feed. "Not police," he said grimly. "Private security, Whitmore's men." Diane was already on the phone. "We're moving. Pack only what you can carry." Jonathan grabbed his laptop. Marcus yanked the hard drives from the desk, and Claire froze in the doorway. "He'll never stop," she whispered. "He'll keep coming until I'm gone." "Then we stop him first," I said. We exited through the underground parking lot, Marcus leading us toward a rental car. Snow crunched under our boots as we piled in. Just before we pulled out, Claire looked back through the rear window. One of the men was staring right at us, phone pressed to his ear. By the time we reached Jonathan's office at the Globe, he'd already alerted his editor. Within the hour, the newsroom transformed into a fortress. Reporters crowded around screens, attorneys combed through files, and security stationed guards at every door. For the first time in years, Claire's story wasn't being silenced, it was being amplified. Then came the breaking point. At 4:36 p.m., the Globe's website went live with the headline, "Exclusive: The Whitmore Legacy. Charity. Corruption and Control." Beneath it, Claire's byline. Her name, her voice. The exposé was surgical in its precision. Every shell, company mapped, every fraudulent account traced, every abused wife's testimony woven into a tapestry of quiet horror and defiance. The world learned how Douglas Whitmore's empire wasn't built on wealth, but obedience. By sunset, it was viral. News anchors dissected the story. Politicians issued statements, and law enforcement, those not on Whitmore's payroll, opened investigations. That night, we watched the broadcast from a safe house outside Boston. Claire sat beside me, silent, as the anchor recounted her story, the snowstorm, the humiliation, the survival. When they showed her photo, she flinched. "I don't feel brave," she said softly, "just broken." "Broken people don't take down dynasties," I said. "They rebuild the world." The next morning brought chaos and justice. Federal agents raided the Whitmore estate. Helicopters circled overhead as Douglas was escorted out in handcuffs, expression carved in stone. Stephen tried to flee. He didn't make it far. The headlines the next day were relentless. The fall of the Whitmore's family empire collapses under fraud investigation. I didn't feel triumph, only relief. A week later, Claire testified before the grand jury. When she walked into that courtroom, head high, every reporter turned. She spoke for 3 hours steady, eloquent, unshaken. When she finished, the judge called for recess, and the room erupted in quiet applause. Afterward, she stood on the courthouse steps, microphones flashing like lightning. "I believed silence was safety," she told the crowd. "But silence is a weapon for those who exploit it. To anyone still trapped, speak. You're not powerless. You're just waiting to be heard." Months passed. Douglas Whitmore accepted a plea deal, 15 years in prison for fraud and obstruction. Stephen faced trial for domestic coercion and perjury. The Whitmore mansion was seized by the state, its grand halls now empty echoes of arrogance. Claire, meanwhile, began to heal. She moved into a small cottage by the ocean, started writing again, first articles, then essays, then a book proposal titled Snowfall, A Daughter's Reckoning. When the publisher accepted it, she called me in tears. "It's really happening, Mom. They don't own my voice anymore." The night her first piece was published, a reflective essay about reclaiming power. I sat by the fire, reading the closing lines aloud. The snow that once buried me also preserved me. Under its weight, I found silence. But when it melted, I found truth and a mother's love fierce enough to thaw the world. I closed the laptop, tears burning hot against my cheeks. Outside, the first flakes of winter began to fall again, soft and pure. A knock at the door pulled me from my thoughts. Claire stood there, bundled in a coat, her smile shy but steady. "Mind if I stay for dinner?" Always, I said, pulling her into an embrace. We ate in companionable silence, soup, bread, laughter. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but sure. "Do you ever regret it? Exposing them?" I looked at her across the candlelight. "Never. Because for the first time, you're free." She nodded slowly. "Then so are you." We sat watching the snow fall. Outside the window, 2 women who had survived a storm and built something stronger in its wake. Not revenge, not victory, not freedom.